Welcome to the Philly Prime Podcast. I'm Dave Schratweiser. Some big news out of the Philadelphia Police Department this week. Huge news. Cold case, the Fairmount Park rapist case 20 years ago this year was cracked by the Philadelphia Police Department. And joining us today is Deputy Commissioner Frank Vanore, who heads the detective division that did a phenomenal job on this, Commissioner. And your thoughts first on the fact that this case finally sees a suspect in custody after 20 years.
Well, this case touched a lot of investigators, officers, forensic science people throughout the years. So it was something that we were very happy to see come to a conclusion for the victims, for the people that touched it. That brought some closure, we're hoping, to the families and that were involved in this.
Okay, just to get everybody up to speed, this was in 2003. In the summer of 2003, 3 women were sexually assaulted. Rebecca Parks, a medical student, was out for a jog, ended up getting killed. Rebecca Park, excuse me. And there was a widespread search for the Fairmount Park rapist, as he was titled, for years. Intense investigation at the very beginning. I know, Frank, you were involved at some of the beginning of this in 2003. It was in your area, the city that you were. There's the crime scene there. Talk about how intense this was at the time when these sexual assaults had gone on, and then the murder of Rebecca Park.
Sure. So in April 30th of 2003, in the evening hours, 21-year-old female went for a run and reported later that while jogging on the path, she was attacked by an Hispanic male. She described very distinctly as 5'7", about in his 20s, medium built. She talked about him having an earring in his ear, dark hair. She was attacked, sexually assaulted as part of that incident. She was able to escape and call 911. Report was made. As part of that investigation, which we were in the very beginning of our use of DNA, but a DNA sample was submitted and a profile was developed in this case. And we submitted. That was in April of 2003. Now, my part in this, that our special victims unit at the time handled that case. I was a lieutenant in Southwest Detective Division. So it was in the area where I covered. We didn't handle that investigation, but very quickly we became involved. In July of 2003, July 16th, we received a missing person report from a family member of Rebecca Park. She was a student, medical student. She had been a reserve in the reserves, a second lieutenant in the reserves. She was living in the West Philadelphia area. She went out for a run. That was part of the investigation we developed. She left a lot of her belongings in her room and never returned from that run, is something that we found out. Family member who was trying to reach her by phone with no success came to Philadelphia and found out that she had not been home, called the police, and we began a missing person investigation. It was a pretty intense one because the circumstances, she was in the same area as the sexual assault. She was down in the park area. So it was real important that we did a very thorough search for her. Didn't come up with her remains initially. We searched her apartment looking for any clues that what might have occurred if she came back there, and there really was none. I remember at the time, Inspector Colarulo was in charge of public affairs. He had a press conference. We put out a lot of information about her. Anybody seen her, give us a call. And that was done. I know Mike Chipwood was a lieutenant with me in Southwest. We were pushing pretty hard because you get a lot of missing persons in the detective bureau, but there's always these cases where something's not right here. So.
And then lo and behold, a few days later, correct?
A few days later, and this was great detective work by detectives working in Southwest at the time. A phone call, just a tip came in based on that news report that they were driving to dinner, a woman and her husband, and they heard somebody screaming in the park. That caused them to make a phone call to Southwest and say, listen, we seen that news report. We heard about what happened to the other girl a few months ago. We heard what we believe was screams when we were driving. So we just want to let you know that these detectives, and I had one of them at the press conference, Chris Morano,
Right.
They went and picked this woman up based on that phone call and her husband. They drove with her, and it's all they said to her is, "Tell us where you were when you heard the screams."
Oh.
She said, "Stop right here. We were right here." They got out of the car and they walked up a hill into the park, 3,500 Conshohocken, and the detectives stumbled right upon Rebecca Park's body.
Yeah.
Covered with some dirt, some logs, some leaves. Wasn't really like buried. It was just kind of covered over. And they immediately notified homicide.
Yeah.
We had found her remains.
Okay. I mean, that's some great detective work, some great follow-up. And I remember when that broke, I think I covered the story that day. It was incredible kind of shockwave across the city. And then the sexual assaults, a couple more occurred, those kind of things. But let's go forward a little bit. And the good news this week was also the result of good detective work. And the good news is, and I'll let you tell it since you were the first one to just tell us about it a minute ago, we have now confirmed that Elias Diaz, who was arrested recently, and you can talk about that a little bit,
Sure.
some DNA tests just came back overnight on him. And tell us what the news is, if you would.
Sure. So, like you said, on November 23rd and 24th, we had two attacks up in the northeast section of the city in Pennypack Park. Both of the attacks were very similar. Individual, what was being described as a machete, riding on a bike. And one of the things I didn't say about the previous incidents is he was always on a bike. He was on a metallic purple bike back in 2003. This time is a little different, but he was on a bike. He just attacked individuals kind of unprovoked, swinging it. He actually injured one of the individuals, and another individual fought him off, but also received some injuries. Those attacks were reported. There was also news on those, which generated another tip. This tip went into the 8th Police District. Female police officer that worked for me in East Division for several years, now works up in the 8th District, took that call, hung up the phone at 8 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday, went out to the area where the tipster said this individual was seen, and lo and behold, she found him. And she was able to stop him and apprehend him, recover the machete and a bike that he was on. He was paired up with the November 24th assault rather quickly and charged. And that investigation caused us to take DNA from him to compare to the machete and some of the other items that she had in his possession that day. That DNA did lead us back to 2003 and 2007, the attacks that we already had him connected to, and showed that Elias Diaz was the Fairmount Park rapist.
When that happened Sunday morning, I know SVU and the FBI were already working to get a name and tracking down leads on the Fairmount Park rapist for years, and then a lot this past year. But Sunday morning, when they arrest this guy and it's Elias Diaz, if I understand correctly, some of your detectives in SVU and the FBI, you had a name, and you were looking for a guy like this or a guy fitting that description. And when this starts to come together Sunday morning, what's the phone calls to Frank Vanore? Is it, you're not going to believe this, but guess what? That guy is this guy.
They were the phone calls. Well, believe it or not, I was out of town the week before, and I was getting calls from the media saying, "Hey, is there any thought that you think this guy is the Fairmount Park rapist?" And I thought that the people calling me then were out of their minds. I said, "You think he's in the same place in the park doing the same thing?" And lo and behold, the DNA told us that it was him. So, but yes, they thought he was a prime suspect. He happened to be on our radar, and I could explain that a little bit.
Yeah. So do me a quick favor, Frank, before you do that. What are the charges on him now?
Right now, the district attorney's office has approved the charge of murder, rape, and related offenses as in respect to Rebecca Park and the incident that occurred in July of 2003.
And he's also charged in the machete attacks. Am I right about that?
And he's charged in the machete attacks also that occurred this year. As far as the other rapes in the pattern, there's more investigation going on with that. The district attorney has all the information. There may be follow-up investigation, and I'm sure they'll make a decision on the charging in those cases.
Okay. Now, if you want to back us through, since this is incredible to me when I heard about it the other morning, when you guys were getting ready to announce this, that 20 years have gone by, and this suspect is still in Philadelphia, and now at this point committing more crimes. Apparently, he's committed a couple in between that were drug offenses, I believe. We'll get to that in a second. But talk about all the work that's been done, and especially the work recently that kind of put you guys onto this guy, this individual. There's a lot of DNA and familiar DNA that was used. Am I right about that? To kind of track down who you thought would be the family?
Right. So back in 2021, like I said, this touched a lot of hands. So Captain Darby began with this in 2003, Special Victims. He really paid a lot of attention to this. This was really always on the front burner. If something came up, he was one of the first ones to say, let's go check this person. Let's check this out. When he handed the gauntlet over to Mark Bergman years later, Mark kept it going, and he kept this job in the front burner. It always had SIU assigned people, Special Investigative Unit, people that would follow up leads, tips, and do whatever they can to try to bring this case in. In 2021, we began to contract with a genealogist corporation, our Forensic Science Bureau. We put the Boy in the Box case in, and we were looking for other cases where we had a DNA profile. This obviously was at the top of the chart. So when they put this case in, it sent us down a branch. It like genealogy does. It's not as easy as you think. It doesn't point right to one person. It takes a lot of legwork. It gives you leads. So I remember initially when Mark was giving me updates, and this was years ago, it brought us to New York. It brought us up a family tree, and they ran out of branches. It was the wrong way. It was the family, but we had no idea where we were in the family line. So they had to back down and try it again. And part of that branch brought us to Puerto Rico this year, where they contacted a family and knew we were in the right family, but it wasn't our doer. It wasn't our profile. However, as they made certain contacts, they developed a name that the family gave them of Elias Diaz. But many of the family members told them, we haven't seen him in many years. We don't know if he's in Puerto Rico or the United States, and we're not even sure if he's alive. So that caused the FBI to come back to Philadelphia and start to look for the person that we know as Elias Diaz. We're not even sure if we're at the right person. And they ran into a lot of dead end leads. People said, "Oh, we seen him on Kensington Avenue." Some people said they seen him in the area of Cumberland Street in East Division. Others said he had overdosed and passed away. We had no record of that, so we couldn't confirm if that was true. We just didn't know where this person was, so we could at least investigate this person.
2007, I think he gets arrested on a drug charge, and 2015 he gets arrested on a drug charge. Explain to the folks, the listeners, that there's no DNA testing on a drug arrest. Am I right about that? So that's why there's no DNA pop in 07 or 2015, correct?
Right. So the 07, we actually have another rape that happens in 07.
Frank, I'm sorry about that.
Right. So, and that one had DNA. So right around that time, he was arrested for a drug possession case. I didn't look up to see what the drug was, but he was charged with possession, and he was obviously signed his own bail, and he was out. He never went to court. So that same charge, when he got stopped by an officer in 2015, was a failure to appear charge for the same case, and he was given another summons to appear in court. We don't believe he ever appeared in court again. So both of those cases were related. No DNA obviously was taken from him, and they're his only contacts with law enforcement in all these years. 20 years, that was it.
You've been doing this a long time, 30 plus years. I did my job a long time. Serial rapists and a killer in this particular case, or accused killer, alleged killer, they don't just stop doing what they were doing for like a 20-year period, even a 4-year period, and then 16 more years where nothing happens, stay in the same city or location, and then pop up like the Pennypack Park attacks. What were you thinking when you started thinking about this? Defies kind of serial profiling setups.
Yep. Well, I've been doing this for 34 years. I've been in investigations since 1994, and I made detective. It's certainly not the normal behavior of a criminal. Usually they'll repeat their behavior over and over, and that's why they get caught, especially in these sexual assault cases. It's just not the norm. We don't know if he left and came back. He's not really sharing that with us. There was a lot of word back in 2007 when Captain Darby was still involved that he had returned the offender that we were looking for, left and went to Puerto Rico. That drove their investigation even back then over to Puerto Rico. We just didn't know where to go.
Yeah.
We were hoping that if he had committed a crime over there, that we could still use CODIS. It's a national database to try to match it up. No other case ever came forward to say it was connected to those cases we had in CODIS. We know ours matched. We know ours was the same unknown person, but none of the other cases that people submitted throughout the years ever connected to it.
Yeah. I noticed in some of the photos you guys showed the other day and some of the ones we have, they're not exactly the ones we're going to show on the screen here in a minute. He kind of changed his look a little bit too, right? I mean, his hair was longer. He had a long beard, then he had a shorter beard, that kind of stuff. So he was kind of changing up how he appeared, at least, and maybe that kind of contributed to this a little bit too, I think.
Well, it could have. Yeah. We, to this point, at least in the recent history, we believe he was living outdoors. We found a shelter behind Lincoln High School in Philadelphia, where he was sleeping and had some of his belongings there, which we were able to serve a search warrant and take. So we don't know how much he had access to groom or do anything he was doing. But one of the things I just want to bring out is back in 2003 and 2007, we had an old-fashioned sketch artist that did our composite sketches. Mm-hmm. And if you look at his photo from 2007, which you don't have here, and the photo from the sketch of 2007, it is very, 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 very close to being that individual.
Yeah, so and the pictures you see here on the right, Frank, are pictures the police department released in 2021, in August of 2021, are DNA generated, correct? And that's what they thought he might look like. You can see some of the similarities at the top picture in there, that kind of thing. And that was another effort by you guys 2 years ago to jumpstart this case again and get it out in the public eye.
Yeah, so Captain Bergman did that press conference. One of the things he did was we contracted with the genealogy company. The first thing they did as they began trying to look for familial DNA here is use this software to figure out what he should look like today. And it is kind of scary how good that software is.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's very close, if you look at it, to what he actually looked like.
Yeah. Can I ask you, there was a lot made of the bike he rode back in 2003. It was a purple bike, if I remember correctly. It
was a metallic purple bike with the curved handlebars. He did not have the same bike. It would have been the greatest bike of all time 20 years
That was
later.
The picture we put up on trees and poles and stuff in Fairmount Park, along with Rebecca's picture, along with the sketches and all that kind of thing. And he had a shirt on with an emblem on it. I'm going to guess he got rid of that shirt after so much was made of it by the police department. Can I ask if that's been recovered, or can you say?
I have no knowledge that was recovered. I even looked for it. There was distinct, and this was 20 years ago, talk about a chain he wore around his neck, and I don't think we recovered that. So who knows over the years where that may have went. But they were things that we were looking for, because I got to tell you, the witnesses in this case, as traumatic as the situation was, they were great. And our graphic arts person at the time, who's long retired, did a hell of a job depicting from their description what this male looked like. If you look back, I mean, they had the hair right, they had the complexion right, and they had his face just about right. So
can I ask a little bit, as the department or SVU contacted now the family of Rebecca Park and or the other three victims here to at least let them know the news that we potentially have the suspect, and now you do have the suspect charged? Have they been made aware of this? Is there a situation where they might be asked to take a look at photos or a lineup or anything like that? I'm getting into the weeds here a little bit, but if you want to answer that.
Well, as far as Rebecca Park, we found out when we reached out that her dad had passed away at the end of last year, and he was our main contact throughout the course of the investigation. Her brother, however, was contacted. We did update her brother on the case and made sure he knew that someone was arrested. As far as the other victims, well, now that we're in the prosecution stage, they're back with us, so they're victims again, and we're updating their interviews and talking with them. And as we move forward to attempt to prosecute these cases, I'm sure they're going to be actively involved.
Larry Krasner was at the press conference the other day. I thought had an interesting line saying, while we've been investigating for 20 years, this guy's been out riding a bike around Philadelphia trying to outrun justice, and he just ran out of road. interesting. I'm sure that's how you guys all feel here. I mean, this guy's here. I mean, he's sleeping in a tent out behind a school of late. This could have potentially been even more worse than it is if he continued the crimes. But I was floored with the fact that determined detectives really brought this home. Technology, all of the things that they should use, they did use. All the things they could use, they did use. And look at the result here a week before Christmas.
Right. Well, I think John Darby at our press conference really summed it up when he said there are cases when you're an investigator that never leave you. Even if you're done with your job or you change jobs, you still think about those cases. And this was one of them. So everybody that ever touched it, I tried to reach out to as many people as I could. Retired Chief Inspector Jack Maxwell was at the press conference. He stayed off camera, but he came to stand there and support. So there were a few other detectives that showed because this was something that meant a lot to them. So
Captain Darby, he kind of said it good that when detectives go home at night, the case is in their mind. When they get up in the morning, they come back into work, that case is on their mind. They kind of never let it go, especially if it's unsolved, if it's a cold case, if it's something that kind of touched the whole city, which this did. This both the sexual assaults and the murder of Rebecca Park. You were a detective out in Southwest for a long time and other jurisdictions in the city of Philadelphia. These kind of things don't leave you, right?
Nope. There are cases that even if I didn't work on them initially, I spent a little bit of time in homicide. I got to look at the Sion file. That's our only unsolved police murder, just to see if I seen anything that anybody else didn't. But obviously someday, somewhere, we'll get the answer to that. It may not result in an arrest, but it may help and give some closure. But there's other cases, as you know. We all have them. So,
out of an abundance of caution, I'm assuming you bump Mr. Diaz's DNA and some of this information up against other unsolved cases and things like that around the city. Is that kind of being done, or how do you go forward on that path?
Well, one of the things you got to realize is his DNA is in CODIS. So if something hits CODIS and it was him, we should already know about it. That's something that we just didn't have happen. However, his description, what his MO is out there now. If there wasn't DNA recovered, but we had an incident, they're going to be the things we're looking at now. Between now and then, if there was another case, people didn't come forward, were afraid to come forward. That's why the DA urged it. We're urging it. If you have something, if you know something, let us know. Because like you said, laying dormant for almost 20 years doesn't make any sense. He was out there doing something. We just got to figure out where he was.
Yeah. You talk about this a lot at news conferences. All the higher ups talk about it at news conferences. Captains talk about it at news conferences. This is a prototypical case where the smallest tip, the woman and her husband who hear the scream in the park when Rebecca and take the detectives back out to that scene, the tip at this end of this investigation, those simple little tips that people think mean nothing or probably mean nothing sometimes do mean a hell of a lot, especially in this case. Yeah.
And the follow-up to those tips, the police officer Sunday that went out and followed up on the tip, the detectives back in July of 2003 got up out of their desk and said, we'll be right there to get you. We want to know where you were standing. And because of that, we may have never found her body or found it a long time later. Yeah. And that would have ruined the DNA and the ability for us to charge in this case. Yeah. So their diligence, their efforts all the time, people don't realize sometimes a very little thing could lead to an arrest, could lead to breaking a whole case like this.
The suspect in question here, is he cooperative? He's not cooperative. Can we say?
I'm not going to say, but right now he's not giving us a whole lot of information to go on. So
investigation still unfolding here, even though we've now charged them. There's
absolutely, because the special victims cases are still active, and we're going to work to charge them on all of them. So they're still active, and if anything new comes in, we'll add them to the list.
Yeah. Okay. You're in charge of detectives. The deputy commissioner in charge of the detective bureau. Chris Werner's your chief inspector underneath him. SVU is under that, and some of these other detective bureaus that were involved in putting this all together. Your thoughts personally about breaking a case like this, especially at this time of year, and getting a guy who clearly, based on the charges, is a dangerous individual off the streets of Philadelphia?
Well, proud of the detectives. I mean, the new wave detective bureau is technology. They all know how to use it. I sat through a preliminary hearing for Officer Mendez yesterday, and the three individuals that were on at the preliminary hearing for killing him. The entire preliminary hearing was put on with technology.
Yeah.
Talked about cell phone usage, talked about Instagram, talked about all the things that we use to be able to put that case in the right place right now. And it's the same with all these investigations: video recovery, DNA. It's come a long way. We're doing it a lot better. The younger detectives really know how to preserve the DNA. If you look at our crime scenes now, you'll see yellow tape, and then you'll see red tape. That red tape is, we don't go on the other side of it unless you're covered up, because you don't want to spread your DNA around in those areas, because we may be recovering DNA in those areas. So
shell casings, things like that are in that red circle,
weapons
could have valuable DNA on them, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And you don't want to contaminate.
It's important, and you'll see the crime scene investigators go in there. They'll have masks on, and they'll be doing their recovery carefully with PPE, so that we could preserve things like DNA and other evidence.
Okay. Listen, we're approaching the last week of December. Homicides are down 18 to 20%. Some things are moving in the right direction. Solving a case like this is a big kind of cherry on top for the police department at the end of 2023. Just your thoughts about how things are moving at this point in the right direction.
Well, we all know that we were really, really high for a couple of years, but we're down over 100 homicides as of this morning. Shootings are down over 500, well over 500, almost 600 shootings, non-fatal shootings. So we're moving in the right direction. Our homicide clearance rate's at 59%. In the past few years, it's been in the 40s. I think a lot of that has to do with having the shooting investigation group run all their shootings like a homicide, and we're getting to some of those offenders faster than we were before. That clearance rate's around 30%. There were times our non-fatal shooting clearance rate was 9, 10, 11%. So we're resting more. We're preventing retaliation because people are getting off the street quicker. We're using intelligence when one shooting's being handled down there. If it's related to another, whether it's a murder, they're working together all the time. Didn't matter if it was in Southwest and South or East and North Central. Everybody's sitting in the same room. So certainly going in the right direction. We hope to keep it that way and keep pushing forward.
Okay. Well, listen, congratulations on this case. Having covered it for so many years, and the annual update from Captain Darby and then Mark Bergman after that, you on a couple of occasions, things like that. I mean, it's I'm always proud of the police department, but this is one of those things where persistency, following up on those little leads you just talked about, kind of brings you to, wow, this is something that people, I think, never thought was going to be solved, and anybody was ever going to be charged. When it doesn't happen right away, people kind of put it in the back of their mind and sometimes forget about it. You guys did not.
We did not, and I hope to continue the streak going. Like I said, 2 pretty big cases in the last couple of years that we were able to get clarity on. So hopefully we can move forward and do more.
All right, Commissioner, thanks for coming on the show. I always appreciate you coming on and doing this. Happy New Year and have a great holiday, and wish you the best going forward, brother.
Happy holidays, and thank you, Dave.
And great job on this case. I really do think so.
Thank you.
All righty. Thanks, folks. That's it for Philly Prime Podcast this week. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you next time.